The entire office laughed when I pointed at the worn soles of my rival's shoes and asked whether she had walked all the way from another century. I expected her to fire back with one of the sharp remarks that had made our competition famous throughout the company. Instead, she lowered her eyes, held a stack of reports tightly against her chest, and answered with only 2 words that shattered something inside me. My daughters, before I tell you what those 2 words truly meant, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Stories like this remind our community that the person we judge most quickly may be carrying a burden we could never imagine. My name is Callum Mercer, and at 37, I believed success was something you could measure in titles, bonuses, expensive watches, and the number of people who stopped talking when you entered a conference room. I worked as a senior strategy manager at a large consulting firm in Boston, and for almost 2 years, my greatest professional obstacle had been a woman named Laurel Bennett. Laurel was calm where I was aggressive, patient where I was restless, and quietly brilliant in a way that irritated me more than open arrogance ever could. She never bragged, never fought for attention, and never tried to impress anyone, yet executives trusted her judgment. Clients remembered her recommendations. Junior employees came to her for advice. Every time I thought I had finally moved ahead of her, she would deliver a presentation so thoughtful and precise that our directors would begin discussing her name for the next promotion. Our rivalry became part of the office culture. People compared our performance numbers, joked about which of us would become department director, and watched our meetings as if they were sporting events. I told myself I disliked Laurel because she was calculating, but the truth was far less flattering. I disliked her because she made excellence look effortless, while I had spent my entire life fighting to prove that I deserved a place in the room. I had grown up with a father who treated achievement like oxygen and disappointment like betrayal. A second-place finish was not praised. A mistake was not forgiven. By adulthood, I had learned to hide fear beneath confidence and insecurity beneath sarcasm. Laurel's quiet strength made me feel exposed, even though she had never once tried to humiliate me. The morning everything changed began beneath clear winter sunlight pouring through the office windows. Our company was preparing a final proposal for a hospital network, a contract large enough to transform the careers of everyone involved. The director position would be announced after the presentation, and both Laurel and I knew the project would likely determine who received it. I arrived early wearing a new charcoal suit and polished Italian shoes, carrying coffee from a place where 1 cup cost more than some people's lunch. Laurel arrived several minutes later with snow melting along the edges of an old wool coat. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back unevenly, there were faint shadows beneath her eyes, and the brown shoes on her feet were scuffed so badly that one heel appeared to have been repaired with glue. I noticed the shoes immediately. So did 2 younger analysts standing near the printer. One of them glanced away, but I saw amusement flicker across the other's face. I could have remained silent. I could have asked whether Laurel was all right. Instead, I saw an opportunity to make her appear weak on the most important day of our careers. When she crossed the open workspace carrying printed reports, I leaned against a desk and made the cruel joke about her shoes belonging to another century. Laughter spread across the room. It was not loud at first, but it grew because people believed I expected them to laugh. Laurel stopped walking. Her hands tightened around the reports. For the first time since I had known her, the confidence disappeared from her face. I expected anger, but what I saw was grief. When she said, "My daughters," her voice was almost too soft to hear. The room became silent. Laurel continued toward the conference room without explaining. I stood frozen beside the desk while heat rose into my face. I tried to convince myself that the answer did not make sense. The shoes were clearly an adult size. Perhaps she meant her daughter had bought them. Perhaps she was making me feel guilty deliberately. I reached for any interpretation that would protect me from the possibility that I had wounded someone already suffering. The hospital presentation began at 10 in the morning. Sunlight reflected from the glass buildings outside while 12 executives gathered around a long conference table. Laurel sat across from me, reviewing notes with the same focus she always displayed, but her hands trembled slightly when she turned the pages. Our director, Preston Hale, asked me to begin. I delivered the opening confidently, explained the financial projections, and outlined our implementation schedule. The presentation was strong. Yet every time I looked toward Laurel, I saw those damaged brown shoes beneath the table and heard the 2 words she had spoken. When Laurel's section began, she stood and walked toward the screen. Her first few sentences were steady, but halfway through a slide about patient access, her voice weakened. She paused with one hand against the table. Several executives exchanged concerned glances. Preston asked whether she needed a moment. Laurel shook her head and continued. Then the screen changed to a model showing how the hospital could reduce appointment delays for families with critically ill children. Laurel stared at the chart as though it had become something personal. Her breathing grew shallow, and the laser pointer slipped from her hand. Without thinking, I stood and continued from the exact sentence where she had stopped. I explained the model while she returned to her chair. It was the first time in 2 years that I had helped Laurel without calculating how it might benefit me. She whispered a quiet thank you, and I noticed tears shining in her eyes. I finished the section, then returned the presentation to her once she had regained control. Together, we completed the proposal. The hospital executives praised our work and promised a decision within the week, but the moment the meeting ended, Laurel gathered her papers and left the building that I followed her into the bright afternoon. She walked quickly along the sidewalk, her old shoes slipping slightly on patches of melting snow. I called her name, but she did not stop until she reached a small public garden between 2 office towers. Bare trees cast thin shadows across the benches. Laurel turned toward me with a weariness that made her look older than 40. I apologized, but the words sounded inadequate the moment they left me. I said I had been competitive and thoughtless. I admitted that the joke was cruel. Laurel listened without interrupting. Then she sat on a bench and looked down at the shoes. She explained that they had belonged to her daughter, Maisie. Maisie had been 19, a university student studying nursing. She had been bright, stubborn, compassionate, and determined to work with children facing serious illnesses. 8 months earlier, she had been driving home from a volunteer shift when another vehicle crossed the center line during heavy rain. Maisie survived the initial collision but suffered injuries that could not be repaired. She died the following afternoon while sunlight filled her hospital room. The shoes had been the last gift Laurel bought for her. Maisie had chosen them because they looked professional enough for her nursing placement but were comfortable enough for long hospital shifts. Laurel had kept them in a box after the funeral. That morning, before the presentation, she had received a call from the cemetery office explaining that a memorial plaque she had ordered was ready for approval. The call had left her unable to breathe. She had sat on the floor of her bedroom beside the box of Maisie's belongings until she realized she was late for work. Her own shoes had split at the sole the previous day, and without thinking clearly, she had taken Maisie's pair because they were nearly the same size. Laurel said wearing them made her feel as though her daughter had walked into the office beside her. Every defense I had built inside myself collapsed. I remembered the laughter, the way Laurel had lowered her eyes, and how casually I had transformed a mother's grief into entertainment. I sat beside her, but I could not look directly at her. My throat tightened until speaking hurt. I told her I was ashamed. I said I did not expect forgiveness and would accept whatever consequences she believed were appropriate. Then, for the first time in years, I cried in front of another person. Laurel did not comfort me immediately. She stared across the garden while pedestrians passed beneath the pale winter sun. Eventually, she said that grief had taught her something strange. Cruelty often came from pain that had never learned how to speak. She had watched me compete with everyone, dismiss compliments, and treat every meeting like a battle. She said she had often wondered who had convinced me that being second meant being worthless. Her words struck deeper than anger would have. I told her about my father, about the report cards placed on the kitchen table like evidence, about the races where he spoke only to the winner, and about the day I earned a scholarship but was asked why it was not to a more prestigious university. I confessed that I had spent my adult life trying to outrun a judgment that had followed me since childhood. Laurel listened, but she did not excuse what I had done. She said pain might explain cruelty, but it never erased responsibility. I agreed. The next morning, during daylight, I gathered the entire department in the open workspace. Laurel did not know what I planned to do. I stood near the same desk where I had mocked her and admitted that my behavior had been humiliating, unprofessional, and cruel. I did not reveal the story of Maisie because it was not mine to share. I told everyone that the laughter had happened because I created an environment where disrespect seemed acceptable, and I apologized to Laurel publicly. I also sent a written account of the incident to Human Resources and informed Preston that I would accept disciplinary action. The room was uncomfortable, but I did not try to soften the truth. Laurel stood near the windows, holding a notebook against her side. When I finished, she gave a small nod. It was not forgiveness, but it was more grace than I deserved. Over the following weeks, our rivalry changed. At first, the shift was awkward. We still disagreed, sometimes sharply, but I stopped treating disagreement as war. I began asking Laurel why she held a different view instead of searching for ways to defeat it. She challenged my assumptions without humiliating me, and I discovered that her strongest ideas often improved my own. We worked together on the hospital contract after it was awarded to our firm, designing programs that helped families navigate treatment costs and transportation. Laurel suggested naming one of the company's annual volunteer initiatives after Maisie. I supported the proposal, but only after asking whether the tribute would comfort her or reopen the wound. She chose the name Maisie's Steps. The program provided new professional shoes, transit passes, and paid internship support to nursing students from struggling families. Laurel explained that Maisie had once worried about affording the clothes and transportation required for hospital placements. The first event took place on a bright spring afternoon inside a community center filled with tables of shoes, backpacks, and medical supplies. Dozens of students attended. Laurel greeted each one personally. I watched her kneel beside a young woman who was trying on a pair of brown shoes similar to Maisie's and saw both of them begin to cry. Something changed in me that day. For years, I had believed power meant entering a room and making everyone notice me. Laurel showed me that real strength could look like entering someone else's pain and making them feel less alone. When the company finally announced the new department director, Preston called Laurel and me into his office. The hospital executives had praised our collaboration and said the proposal succeeded because our different strengths had become united. Preston offered the position to me, months earlier, but would have accepted before he finished speaking. Instead, I looked at Laurel and understood that the old version of me was being offered everything he had wanted. I also understood that accepting without honesty would return me to the same empty race. That I told Preston that Laurel was the better person for the position. I explained that she possessed the trust of the team, the respect of clients, and the judgment required to lead without fear. Laurel stared at me in disbelief. Preston asked whether I was certain. I said I was. Laurel accepted the role, but she made one request. She asked that I become deputy director and lead strategy development beside her. She said the department did not need one of us to defeat the other. It needed both of us to become better than we had been. Several months later, on a warm afternoon, Laurel invited me to visit Maisie's memorial garden at the university where she had studied. Sunlight moved through young maple leaves, and small white flowers surrounded a stone engraved with Maisie's name. Laurel wore the brown shoes, now carefully restored by a local craftsman. She told me she no longer wore them only because she missed her daughter. She wore them because they reminded her that grief could still walk toward something meaningful. That I placed a small card beside the stone. On it, I had written that I never knew Maisie, but her life had changed mine. Through her mother, she had taught me that ambition without kindness becomes another form of emptiness, that apologies must be followed by action, and that forgiveness is not permission to forget but an invitation to grow. Laurel read the card in silence. Then she told me she forgave me. Those two words made me cry again, but this time the tears did not come only from shame. They came from relief, gratitude, and the realization that a person could be confronted by the worst thing he had done and still choose to become someone better. Before this story ends, please leave a meaningful comment about a time when someone's kindness, forgiveness, or hidden struggle changed the way you viewed them. Your words may remind another person to pause before judging someone whose pain cannot be seen. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. I once believed Laurel Bennett was the rival standing between me and success. I know now that she was the person standing between me and the man I was becoming. The shoes I mocked were not signs of failure or weakness. They carried the memory of a daughter, the grief of a mother, and the beginning of a lesson I would spend the rest of my life trying to honor. Sometimes the words that break us are not the cruel ones shouted in anger. Sometimes they are the quiet words spoken by someone we have wounded, words that force us to see the truth and decide whether we will turn away from it or finally change.